Some ghosts don't haunt halls or wear chains. Some have fur, a scarred eye, and a name you never forgot, even when the world told you to let go. The late autumn wind slipped through the rows of bare trees, carrying the damp scent of earth and old wood dust. The ash-gray sky hung like an old military blanket, heavy, threadbare, and waiting to collapse. On the outskirts of Bracken Hollow, time moved slower than anywhere else. Even the wind seemed careful not to disturb what the world had left behind. A battered green pickup truck creaked to a stop outside a rusted scrapyard at the end of Fremont Road, the kind of place where the forgotten go to disappear. Inside the truck, Daniel Mercer, a former Marine with a frame hardened by 3 tours and a silence honed by years of loss, sat still. His eyes didn't blink, just stared ahead at the gates like he was waiting for a command that would never come. He got out, wincing as the cold bit into the creases of his skin. Pulling his flannel collar tighter, Daniel walked toward the iron gate, which groaned like it hadn't been opened in months. He pushed it with a grunt, and it yielded with a rusty complaint. Inside, the junkyard stretched like a battlefield graveyard. Twisted steel, shattered glass, dented washing machines, old tires piled like bunkers. Daniel scanned the chaos, wooden ruler in hand, searching for planks to patch the roof of his cabin. The pension didn't stretch far, and every repair was a mission now. Then he froze. A sound, a breath, a whimper, drifted from deep within the metal maze. Not the wind. It was softer, alive. Instinct took over. Daniel moved slowly, silently, as if stepping through an active minefield. Behind a stack of rusted sheet metal and car doors, curled on the cracked cement, lay a dog, a German shepherd. Its fur was patchy, caked with dirt and dried blood. One hind leg was twisted at a wrong angle, and one eye had gone milky white, blind. The dog didn't move, barely breathed, but what stopped Daniel cold wasn't the wounds. It was the collar, old leather, cracked, rust-stained, and a tag, barely readable under grime. He knelt, lifting it with trembling hands. The name etched into the metal hit like a bullet to the chest. Kaiser. His voice cracked around the word. His throat tightened. Kaiser had gone missing 7 years ago, during the worst ambush of Daniel's final deployment. Presumed dead. A report written, a grave marked empty. Yet here he was. Daniel dropped to his knees. In that moment, the junkyard vanished. The cold air, the rusted chaos, even the years that had dragged since. They all blurred. All he saw was the dog who had once saved his life, now barely holding on. Kaiser was alive, barely breathing, but alive. And Daniel didn't know it yet, but this wasn't just a reunion. It was the beginning of a second chance, for both of them. Daniel didn't waste a second. Kaiser was still breathing, barely, but each rise and fall of his chest was weaker than the last. Daniel scooped him up with the same urgency he once used to lift wounded comrades from burning Humvees. The German shepherd's body was feather-light, ribs like sticks under fur that was more scab than coat. His head lolled against Daniel's chest, limp and bloodied. "I've got you," Daniel whispered, voice tight, as he cradled him in his arms like something sacred. The pickup roared back to life as Daniel tore out of the junkyard. One hand gripped the wheel, the other pressed against Kaiser's bony side, as if just touching him might keep him tethered to this world a little longer. There was only one place he could go. Hope's Haven, a clinic on Willow Street run by Dr. Evelyn Carter, a former military medic who had once stitched soldiers under gunfire. She didn't care about money. She cared about life. The bell above the clinic door jingled as Daniel stumbled in. The receptionist opened her mouth, but one look at the bundle in Daniel's arms stopped her cold. "Evelyn!" Daniel barked, voice cracking. "Now!" Within seconds, Dr. Carter appeared. Tall, gray streaks in her bun, eyes sharp from years of making impossible decisions. She took one look at the dog and didn't ask questions. They rushed Kaiser into a back room. Daniel followed but was forced to stop at the swinging door. The metal closed in front of him with a soft click, but it felt like a wall had dropped between them. The clock above the waiting room ticked too loudly. Daniel's hands were stained with dried blood, his flannel soaked with something heavier than just water and dirt. He stared at the door, willing it to open. Finally, Evelyn emerged. Her gloves were off, her face grave. Severe malnutrition, his heart's weak, his back leg completely ruined, infections already spread, and she hesitated, eyes softening. He's showing signs of trauma, psychological, likely PTSD. Daniel swallowed hard. Will he make it? She paused. I've seen dogs like this before. Some let go, some don't. Letting him rest, it wouldn't be cruel. Daniel's voice was low, steady. No. He's a soldier, he added after a breath. He fought. He's still fighting. So we fight. Evelyn studied him for a long moment, then she nodded. Then we fight. The days blurred. Daniel never left Kaiser's side. He spooned broth into his mouth every few hours, massaged his limbs, spoke in whispers of desert nights and commands from another lifetime. Stay. Focus. Hold. At first there was nothing. Then on the third night, as dawn crept through the blinds, Kaiser's tail gave the faintest twitch. Just a flick. Daniel froze. His breath hitched. He remembers, he whispered, and in that fragile movement, a flicker of muscle and memory, Daniel found hope. The war wasn't over, not for either of them. Daniel sat on the clinic floor, still staring at Kaiser's tail. It had moved only slightly, but after days of stillness, it was a miracle. A whisper from the past that said, I'm still here. He didn't sleep that night. Not really. He stayed by Kaiser's side, whispering stories from long ago. Combat patrols, dust storms, the way Kaiser used to nudge him awake before dawn, just before the sky bled orange over the sand. The next morning, Kaiser opened one eye, clouded but tracking. He was weak, barely able to lift his head, but he was present, and that was enough for Daniel to take him home. The old cabin on the edge of Bracken Hollow had never felt so alive. Daniel laid out thick blankets beside the wood stove and arranged bowls of water, soft food, and fresh cloths. He placed Kaiser down gently, covering him with his old Marine jacket. It was there, on the second morning back, that Liam first saw the dog. Liam was 10, quiet and curious, the kind of boy who watched the world before speaking to it. His house sat just beyond the tall wooden fence, close enough to hear the low hum of Daniel's pickup every morning and the creak of the front door when he came home. He'd noticed the change. Instead of returning alone, Daniel now moved slowly, carefully, like he was guarding something precious. That morning, Liam stood at the fence, peeking through the slats. He saw the cart first, a small wooden platform with wheels and a blanket. And then he saw Kaiser. The boy's breath caught. The dog was unlike any he'd ever seen. Thin, scarred, his fur patchy like fallen leaves in November. One eye was milky white, the other half closed. Liam flinched and almost stepped back, but he didn't. Instead, he tiptoed along the fence until he found a small knothole. Then every day after school, he returned, silent, watching. Daniel noticed on the third day. He didn't say anything, just pushed Kaiser's cart closer to the fence and brought out a second chair. Then, without looking over, he began to read from an old field journal, his voice soft, even, calm. The next morning, Liam came around the front gate. He clutched a small plastic bag in one hand. Inside was a peeled carrot. Can I feed him? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Daniel looked down at Kaiser, then back at the boy. He smiled. Not yet, but you can sit with him. Let him hear your voice. So Liam did. Day after day he came back, sometimes with bread, sometimes with stories about school or the dog he'd lost in a storm. He talked softly, unsure if Kaiser understood, but Kaiser listened, head tilting slightly, ear twitching when the boy laughed. Then one afternoon, Liam reached out with a trembling hand. He touched the dog's head and whispered, I'm not scared of you anymore. Kaiser didn't move, but he let out a low, soft whine and pressed his head gently into the boy's hand. The bond was sealed, not between a boy and a dog, but between two broken hearts learning to trust again. Kaiser pressed his head into Liam's small hand, and for a long moment, nothing else mattered. The boy didn't move. He just sat there, fingers gently stroking the scarred fur, eyes wide with the quiet understanding only children and soldiers seemed to carry. From the porch, Daniel watched. He didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. He knew something had shifted, that Liam had reached a place in Kaiser that medicine and memory couldn't. That night, the house was quieter than usual. Even the wind through the trees seemed to hush itself. Daniel laid Kaiser down on the mat by the fire, gently adjusting the folded blanket beneath his body. The German shepherd let out a slow breath and settled, eyes drifting closed. Daniel pulled up his chair, journal in hand, and began writing. Small notations of progress. Responded to touch, head turned toward Liam. Steady breath. Good eye clearer today. He stayed there long after midnight, nodding off in the chair beside him. Then came the sound. A thud. Daniel's eyes snapped open. Another thud, louder, sharp, followed by claws scraping against the wooden floor. He was on his feet in an instant, the same way he'd once leapt from sleep in a combat zone. Kaiser? No response, just chaos in the dark. He found the dog in the far corner of the room, body trembling, legs flailing. Kaiser's head slammed into the wall once, then again. He clawed at the floor, teeth clenched, eyes wide, but not seeing. Not this room. Not this time. He was somewhere else. No, 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 Daniel whispered, dropping to his knees. It was a nightmare, but not the kind you could wake from with a nudge. This was deeper, a memory looping through pain, a fire zone burned into a brain that never forgot. Daniel reached out slowly, speaking low. You're not there. You're home now. You're safe. But Kaiser didn't stop. Blood smeared on the wood where his head had struck it. Daniel's heart pounded. He moved in close, wrapped both arms around Kaiser's body, and pulled him tight. You're not alone anymore, he whispered into his fur, holding fast as the dog kicked and thrashed. One claw raked across Daniel's arm, drawing a thin line of blood. He didn't flinch. He just held tighter. I've had them too, he whispered, voice cracking, waking up gasping, hearing explosions that aren't there. I know, Kaiser, I know. Slowly, Kaiser's body began to still. The wild panic faded into shaking. His breathing was shallow, rapid, but the thrashing stopped. Daniel didn't let go. He kept rocking slightly, his cheek against the dog's matted fur. You're home, he whispered again, and I'm not letting go. As the first light of morning crept through the curtains, Kaiser let out one long, deep exhale, almost a sigh. His body softened against Daniel's, as if releasing something too heavy to carry anymore. And for the first time in a long time, the silence in the house felt like healing, not absence. Morning broke gently through the cabin's windows, casting long, golden lines across the wooden floor. Daniel hadn't moved. He was still sitting beside Kaiser, one hand resting over the dog's chest, feeling the steady rise and fall of breath. The nightmare had passed. Kaiser slept now, not the restless, twitching sleep of trauma, but the still, quiet kind that came after something had finally let go. Daniel watched the rhythmic motion of his rib cage like a man watching a flag sway in the wind, fragile, but proud. For days after, things were different. Kaiser responded more, his good eye following Daniel and Liam as they moved through the house. He wagged his tail not just once, but often. He even made a soft, rumbling noise when Liam brought him soft bread or read from his storybook. It wasn't quite a bark, but it was something. Then one afternoon, Daniel stepped out to check the mailbox and found an envelope with a government seal. He frowned, tore it open. Inside was a letter, short, formal, unbelievable. The story of Kaiser, the old soldier's dog who had survived against all odds, had made its way through the town, across the state, and into the hands of someone high enough to care. Someone had shared the photos Daniel posted quietly in a local veteran group, the videos of Kaiser in his custom cart, of Liam helping him practice old commands. Now the office of the president was inviting Kaiser to Washington, D.C. He was to receive the Presidential Medal of Animal Valor. Daniel stared at the letter for a long time before showing Liam. The boy's eyes widened. Is Kaiser going to the White House? He whispered. Daniel smiled, emotions warring in his voice. Looks like it. They traveled by van, provided by the Department of Veterans Affairs. Kaiser wore his mobility harness, polished and newly fitted with a ribbon Liam had tied himself. Inside the quiet transport, Daniel held Kaiser close the entire ride. When they arrived, the air buzzed with reporters, flashbulbs, and dignitaries. But Daniel saw none of it. All he saw was Kaiser, poised at his side, standing tall in the harness despite his missing leg. His good eye was calm, alert, focused, as if he knew exactly where he was and what it meant. At the front of the White House lawn, the announcer stepped to the podium. And now, honoring a four-legged hero whose loyalty survived war, loss, and 7 years of silence, we present the Medal of Animal Valor to Kaiser, retired K-9, partner to Sergeant Daniel Mercer. The applause thundered. Kaiser, steady, stepped forward. Then slowly, deliberately, he raised his remaining front paw. A salute. The crowd fell silent. And in that silence, Daniel felt everything he had held inside begin to crack. His throat tightened as he bent beside his oldest friend. "You never left anyone behind," he whispered. Kaiser leaned into him gently, and though the years had taken much from them both, at that moment, beneath a blue sky, surrounded by strangers, they stood whole again. The applause still echoed in Daniel's ears as he sat beside Kaiser in the quiet van ride home. The Medal of Animal Valor rested in a velvet box on his lap, unopened. He hadn't looked at it again. He didn't need to. The real honor had already happened. On that stage under the open sky, when Kaiser raised his paw and reminded the world that loyalty, once earned, never dies. But Daniel knew something else too. This was their last mission. In the days that followed, Kaiser grew quieter. Not worse, just stiller. As if his body, having been given the chance to stand tall one last time, was ready to rest. He lay for hours beneath the oak tree outside the cabin, where the sunlight streamed through the branches and the wind carried the scent of grass and home. Liam visited every afternoon. Sometimes he read. Sometimes he sat in silence, his hand resting gently on Kaiser's flank. Daniel watched it all. He stopped writing in the journal, not because there wasn't anything to record, but because nothing needed to be. These moments didn't belong to pages. They belonged to memory. Then on a bright May morning, the breeze softer than usual, the light golden and forgiving, Kaiser didn't lift his head. Daniel knew before he touched him. He sat down beside him slowly, carefully. Liam, sensing something in the air, stood a few feet away, eyes wide and unsure. Daniel placed a hand over Kaiser's heart. No movement. The old soldier had gone silent. He didn't cry, not immediately. He just sat there, hand resting on the still fur, breathing slowly. For a long time, he said nothing. Then finally, in a voice no louder than the wind, "You made it home, boy." He buried Kaiser beneath the oak tree that afternoon, the spot where the sun always lingered. Liam helped, not with words, just with small hands holding the corners of the blanket, eyes full of grief that had no name. They carved a small wooden plaque together. Liam painted the letters carefully. Kaiser, soldier. Brother, home. News of Kaiser's passing spread. Veterans from across the country shared their stories. Photos of him, standing tall at the White House, nestled against Liam, saluting beside Daniel, were posted with captions that simply read, "Never forgotten." But something bigger came. Congress passed the Kaiser Act, a bill that guaranteed lifelong care for military dogs after retirement, no matter where they ended up. Daniel received the letter weeks later. He read it once, then folded it and placed it beside the medal in the cabinet. Each evening he still sat beneath the oak tree, sometimes with Liam, sometimes alone. The bench beside him was empty, but not really, because in the rustle of the leaves, in the memory of a wagging tail, in a quiet salute, Kaiser was there. And some goodbyes, Daniel learned, don't end things. They begin something else, something sacred and forever. The breeze stirred the leaves of the oak tree gently, as if in response to Daniel's quiet thoughts. The bench beside him was still, but not empty, because some goodbyes don't end things. They plant something that lives on. Daniel sat with one hand resting on the wooden seat, the other holding a small object, Kaiser's old tag. The edges were still dented. The name, now smooth from years of touch, still shimmered faintly in the golden light. Sometimes people passed and saw him there, sitting beside an invisible friend. They didn't always understand, but they didn't need to. Kaiser's grave lay just beneath the tree, marked not just by the plaque Liam had painted, but by the flowers that never stopped arriving. Strangers, soldiers, school children, families, people who had seen Kaiser's story online or in the news or had simply whispered it to each other in coffee shops and veteran halls. They called him the dog who remembered. But Daniel knew the truth. Kaiser hadn't just remembered. He had waited through 7 years of silence, through pain, through hunger, through nightmares that clawed at his mind in the dark. He had waited for the one person who never gave up believing he was still out there. And when they found each other again, not in a desert, but in a forgotten scrapyard, it wasn't a rescue, it was a reunion. In the months after his passing, the Kaiser Act transformed into more than legislation. It became a movement. Young handlers began writing letters to their retired K-9 partners. Shelters received grants to care for injured working dogs. Schools invited veterans to speak, not about war, but about healing, about loyalty, about the dog who never stopped being a soldier, even after the world tried to forget him. Daniel was invited to speak too. He didn't go often. The words were still hard sometimes. But once, at a small elementary school in the next town over, he brought the leash Kaiser had once worn and read from the journal he'd written during those long nights beside the fire. He didn't speak like a hero, just a man who had once been lost and was found again. Liam came with him. He stood beside Daniel quietly, holding a photograph of himself and Kaiser, one hand on the dog's back, the other clutching a crumpled storybook. At the end of the assembly, a girl raised her hand and asked softly, "Was Kaiser your best friend?" Daniel smiled. "No," he said. "He was more than that. He was proof." "Proof of what?" the girl asked. Daniel looked out the window where the sunlight hit a patch of grass just so. Proof that loyalty outlasts war, outlasts time, even outlasts goodbye. That night, back under the oak tree, Daniel sat with Liam again. They didn't speak much. They just listened. To the breeze, to the memory of paused steps long since faded, and to the silence that no longer felt like absence. Because love like that never really leaves. It simply waits, quiet, patient, eternal, until it's needed again.